Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Workplace Safety North webinar, New Health and Safety Research on Ontario Logging Industry. My name is Gabby Lemon, and I'm the event specialist here at Workplace Safety North. We appreciate your attendance here today and want to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started. Your microphones have been muted, and we ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for questions. Questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. If you have any technical issues using the Zoom application, do let us know in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. Just a note, this webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording, a copy of the presentation, and resource information will be sent to you within a few days. Today, we are joined by Connor Poulin and Adrian Alam from Workplace Safety North. I'll invite Connor on screen to start today's presentation. Welcome, Connor.
Good afternoon, folks. Thank you very much, Gabby, and we welcome everyone who is joining us on some of the new research that we developed and dove into to help reduce the risk in the logging sector. So we'll get started by talking about the table of contents today. We're going to dive into the risk assessment project. We're going to talk about a little bit of the background, such as James Reason's model of accident causation. And we're going to talk about the workshop, which was a tripartite and collective process. We're going to move forward into the risk assessment workshop results, which is the top 10 risk categories that were identified. We'll take a peek at the infographic that most of you have seen that was launched to the top 10 risk factors in the logging sector. And we're going to move towards the analysis of those top 10 risk events. Moving forward, we categorized all of those events and dove deeper into a root cause analysis where we defined a risk statement and we focused using a fishbone diagram method to dive deeper into the actual root causes of these risks. We categorized the top primary causal factors and we developed an infographic, which is the top 10 causes of collisions in the logging industry. We're going to talk about the list of solutions and controls that were developed during the workshop, as well as what we should focus on immediately, and some proactive efforts from our Forestry Tripartite Committee. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a little bit of a background of where this all started, which was the risk assessment project. So the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. On the screen, you're going to see James Reason's model of accident causation. Each different color on the screen acts as a layer of defense, which represents a slice of cheese. Now, as you know, in the slices of cheese, especially Swiss cheese, there are going to be holes. Those holes are going to act as latent and active failures. The image illustrates that although many layers of defense may lay between the worker and the accident, if there's any flaws in each layer, once they align, an accident will occur. So simultaneous failure and absence of risk controls could lead to a catastrophic event. So how did it all get started? Well, we picked a sector, which was forestry, and we then selected our subject matter experts. So we reached out to the industry and we selected subject matter experts from all over the province of Ontario, starting in northwestern Ontario to northeastern, and we had individuals represent from parts of southern Ontario. The events were identified. So we looked at what is keeping our logging employers up at night. The events were then analyzed and we categorized them or prioritized the events. So the workshop was open, transparent, and collaborative. We ensured perspectives and viewpoints were heard. We ensured that the responses were respected and not freely edited. And finally, the list was shared with our participants before the workshop. The workshop results were reviewed and validated by our participants. So finding an acceptable solution so that all our members can support, only our industry experts ranked in these risks when we ranked the likelihood versus the consequences of each event that was identified. The process was not about the consensus, although the results demonstrate a significant degree of convergence. So what you're seeing on the screen now are the top 10 risks that were identified during our risk assessment workshop. This risk assessment workshop took place in December of 2022 and finalized in January of 2023. Now on the screen, there's the top 10 risks that were identified. And as you can see, we have driving hazards. Highway travel was the #1 risk that our workshop participants identified that is truly keeping them up at night. As we move down the list, we looked at contact with equipment and materials, such as conventional harvesting, and that could be contact with overhead debris. Number 3 is driving hazards. Again, driving during work activities, including haul drivers. Driving to and from work sites was number 4. Number 5 was lockout as the risk category. Inadequate or improper lockout, we're working on energized equipment. And number 6 was fatigue, so fatigue-induced incidents. We had psychosocial hazards, which is impairment causing an injury, as well as another psychosocial hazard being number 8, which was our behavior, such as shortcuts, complacency, attitude, and perception of risk. Number 9, again, contact with equipment or materials, which is caught or struck by equipment, as well as number 10, met culture being lack of company or internal enforcement. So with those 10, we were able to release the infograph. A lot of you folks have seen this infograph floating around online, and this is showing those top 10 risks that were identified. So as you can see, driving did come up multiple times in our top 10 risks. And as we move to the next slide, you're going to see it put together in a pie chart. So this pie chart, it really explodes and shows you where we need to focus our attention to, and that is driving hazards. Of the top 10 risks, 41% of those are driving hazards. Machinery took 26%. Psychosocial hazards was 25%, with lockout taking 13% and culture being 12%. So again, the focus here was on the driving hazard as it took 41% of our top 10 risks. So here is the 5 top risks and contributing factors, as well as their undesired outcomes. So we take a look at number 1 being driving hazards, and some of the contributing factors being weather. Everyone knows the weather is getting more extreme. Road conditions and road maintenance. These are all things that could lead to a collision and an injury to worker, even the public. Number 2, some of the contributing factors could be unsafe felling practices. And this was for contact with equipment such as overhead debris. It could be lack of hazard identification or lack of hazard tree removals. These were some of the contributing factors that led to this being the number 2 risk. Again, injury to workers, damage to equipment, loss of production or process. Driving hazards, lack of enforcement on forestry roads, lack of driver monitoring. So these are some contributing factors, and we just wanted to show you the top 5 risks and some of the contributing factors that led to them. So on the next slide here, we're going to take a look in more depth. So we decided to dive deep into those top risks with a root cause analysis workshop. So this was a 2-day workshop that took place in November of 2023. And on the screen here, you're going to see our subject matter experts who are dove deep into the primary root causes of driving hazards. On the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to see our representatives that did attend the workshop, but did not vote towards any of the workshop results. And that would be myself, the facilitator, as well as Adrian Allen, a co-facilitator. We had Penny Ratushniak, health and safety specialist, who joined us, as well as Shelley Spear, our ministry provincial specialist. We had Tom Welton, Brandy, Trisha, and Tiana join us for some technical support and ensure that the workshop flew as needed. And then on the left-hand side, those are our subject matter experts. What you can note that in the blue is our subject matter experts representing the workers, and in the pink or peach is the employer representatives. So on day 1 of our root cause analysis workshop, we had to figure out a risk statement. So based on the risk assessment results and further analysis, the root cause analysis working group confirmed and developed the following risk statement using the fishbone approach, which is going to address our driving hazards. So we determined that our risk statement was going to be commutes on highway and forestry roads can result in injury to workplace parties and or the public based on unsafe acts and conditions during travel. So for those that are not familiar with the fishbone diagram, this is a way that we can dive deep into the root causes of driving hazards. So at the head of the fishbone is our risk statement, which is going to be the commutes on highway and forestry roads that can result in injury to workplace parties and or the public based on unsafe acts conditions during travel. So the 6 primary casual factors are tools and machines, culture, environment, processes, people, and measures. And then based on that, we ask the question, why? So on the next slide, you're going to see the work that we did with our workshop participants and how deep we really dove into these hazards. So as you can see on the screen, this was our fishbone diagram in completion. Lots of information here, and I understand it would be tough to see on the screen. So as we go through the next few slides, we're going to look at each one of those categories, starting with tools and machines. So here's a little bit of a blown up version of tools and machines. And what we really want you to focus your attention on is the bolded in black, but with the little red box around it. Those were our top 10 root causes when we dove into it. Those are our primary causal factors. As we work through it, we ask the question, why? So if I can get your attention to the deficient vehicles or older equipment with inadequate maintenance, we asked our participants why. Why is that a factor? And as we work our way down, our secondary causal factors could be seasonal drivers, could be operators, and so on and so forth as we continue asking that question, why? So as we move to the next slide, we're going to look into the culture. So there was number 1 on machines and tools. And now as we go to culture, you're going to see number 2, which was inadequate or limited support on safety programs. So when we figured out these top primary causal factors, we had our participants vote on which ones were the most important and where we should focus our efforts on. So with number 2 being inadequate or limited support of safety programs such as the IRS, we asked the question again, why is this a problem and what can we do? Again, on the screen, highlighted in the red, you're going to see reluctant to report incidents and near misses. This did come in at number 12, but we thought it would be important to share anyways. As we move to the next slide, you're going to see our next category being process. And on the screen, you're going to see inconsistent communication and completion of shift assessments, such as road condition assessments, vehicle assessments, and so on and so forth. Again, ask the question, why? Well, maybe it's lack of hazard identification and lack of circle checks. As we move forward, you're going to see the next set of categories and the causal factors. So environment. So we've got number 6, inadequate forestry road construction and maintenance being number 6. So we ask again the question, why? Well, maybe lack of dust control, lack of, proper road conditions or poor road installations. It could be cost, lack of workers, all these things which are leading to driving hazards being our number 1 risk. People. As you all know, people are definitely a contributing factor to some of the hazards we have in our workplaces. Number 4, starting at the top of the screen, lack of a fit for duty program, awareness and implementation. Again, we ask the question, why? Well, substance use, fatigue could be a potential issue, and that could be from mental health, long hours, and so on and so forth. So again, we really want to focus your attention just to the bolded black with the red box around it, which is, again, halfway through the screen, limited operator experience being number 8. And again, as we move to the next one, you're going to see our next category, limited, insufficient equipment as well. Measures is next on the list. We got absent or inadequate standard operating procedures. We've got inconsistent competency based on the job driver training. So maybe if we had some consistent on the job driver training, this might reduce some of the risk. So we asked the question, why? Poorly functioning internal responsibility systems is another one. Obviously, everyone has a part to play into ensuring a proper functioning internal responsibility system. And then at the top of the screen, absent or inadequate standard operating procedures. We can move ahead to the next slide, Gabby. So this makes it a lot easier for you folks to follow along, but these were our top 10 risks that were identified. And those were those primary casual factors that got identified during the root cause. So number one, tools and equipment, deficient vehicles or older equipment with inadequate maintenance. So when we had our participants voted, these are what came up as 1 to 10, number one being the number one priority we should focus towards. Culture, inadequate or limited support on safety programs, internal responsibility systems. Number three was measures, inconsistent competency based on the job driver training. Number four, we had lack for fit for duty program awareness and implementation. Number five, limited or insufficient standards and coordination of company, as well as Ministry of Transportation highway maintenance. Number six, inadequate forestry road construction and maintenance. Number seven, we had absence or inadequate safe operating procedures. Number eight, limited operator experience. Number nine, culture, consistent communication and completion of shift assessments, as well as number 10, the category was measures and a poorly functioning internal responsibility system. So based on that, we released an infographic to the industry. Some of you folks have seen this come out now, and this is the top 10 causes of driving hazards in the logging industry. And again, the number one causal factor that we voted on, which was vehicles with mechanical issues and or older equipment with poor maintenance. So this was the infographic that was released, and it will be available to you folks if you haven't received a copy of it. So we looked at now a list of solutions and controls for the top primary root causes. Note that this exercise does not include assessing these controls. These were the controls that were developed during the workshop. So the list provides information on the specific controls or activities that can support a control, as well as the control performance that should be specific, measurable, observable, and auditable. So just a note that the technical report that does go along with this presentation will have a full description of all the controls and the top 10 primary casual factors that were identified during the workshop. So based on our number one, tools and machines, deficient equipment or older equipment with inadequate maintenance, some of the controls that we looked at implementing would be obviously maintenance audits, spot checks, circle checks, documentation of these circle checks, annual inspections, including ones completed by a third party, some standards on years of service for vehicle replacement, such as maybe replacing log truck trailers every 25 years, etc. Certain standards like that. Repair, work done by a qualified and licensed mechanic would also ensure that driving is reduced risk. Strong enforcement on vehicles that do not meet the requirements, as well as plated and unplated vehicles being properly maintained, such as, sanders or plow trucks or rock trucks that maybe aren't plated, but as well as the ones that are plated. And again, seasonal preparedness for equipment and vehicles would also help act as a control to reduce the deficient vehicles or older equipment with inadequate maintenance. So number two was culture, inadequate support of safety programs, such as your internal responsibility system. Some of the controls we looked at, which was auditing, both internal and by a third-party consulting company or audit company. Competent, trained personnel to manage and enforce the programs. We did think that is a control that needs to be implemented as well as managed and followed up. Clearly defining the roles and responsibilities within your safety programs is another control, as well as measurable and accountability for licensees and contractors for safety programs through maybe a legislated modular training program for driving on forest roads. So as we look at number three, and just a note, we're only focusing on the top 5 here. Again, a detailed report of all 10 controls will be listed in the technical report, which will be available to you folks after this session. Measures. So measures was the category, and inconsistent competency based on the job driver training. So again, Monitoring opportunity and programs is a potential control. What really caught my eye was, again, a legislated modular training program standards, which could outline the minimum number of hours for that apprenticeship program, as well as performance-based assessments for driving practices on site. So actual on-the-job training, I think that would be a very beneficial control. Some on-the-job forestry driver experience requirements, such as maybe mandatory hours. These are all things that could be implemented as a control. Some communication on site-specific safety expectations, as well as some government support or incentives for forestry driver training. I think that would go a long way as well. Now, again, these were controls that were developed during the workshop. Number 4, people, lack of fit for duty program and awareness, as well as the implementation, which is huge. It's got to have a consistent program as for auditing and the implementation of the program. We should improve supervisor and worker mental health training to ensure supervisors also recognize substance use and being, and truly being fit for duty. The substance use, drug and alcohol policy, as well as maybe third-party testing if suspected. Fit for duty, worker self-assessment training as well, which would help the workers identify if they are fit for duty. Again, competent trained personnel to manage and enforce these programs, I do think would benefit our industry quite a bit. All right, and the last one we're going to look at here today is going to be people. So people, limited or insufficient standards and coordination of company or MTO highway maintenance. So this really got brought into play thinking about, is there any standards or coordination between our forestry staff and our highway maintenance? Because that would truly reduce some of the risk of driving on these northern highways. And, a big shout out to the folks who do travel up Highway 11 North, or for the folks that are in Northwestern Ontario out towards Million Bay. Can be very dangerous. So we definitely want to get some annual planning, some meetings, some government involvement to help implement best practices with respect to this highway maintenance. We're going to look at another control being government MTO explanation on their standards to ensure that the contractors and drivers and explain these standards to the contractors and drivers at contractor meetings, as well as public awareness and signage of potential haul areas, and share the road reminders to contractors and drivers. Now, we do see some of them, but it'd be great, obviously, and a good control to get them all over the province. Next slide. So based on these controls, we look at what can we focus on next? What can we focus on immediately to make an impact to the industry? Well, based on the controls identified in the top primary causal factors, it would be a benefit to start and focus right away on some of the weaknesses. So as we move to the next slide, we're going to share some of these results. The following presentation and detailed review, which is the technical report of the workshop results, will be shared with the ministry's led Provincial Forestry Tripartite Committee, as well as the WSN Forestry Paper Printing and Converting Advisory Committee. Based on the identified primary causal factors, several areas are going to be addressed with the recommendations on how WSN can support the industry in establishing some effective controls and resources for the industry. And this will include sharing some of the industry's leading practices, as well as knowledge and legislation, as well as the standards. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. We do want to thank you for attending today's webinar, and now is our time to answer any questions if you do have them.
Yeah, thank you, Connor. Thanks for that presentation. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box right now, but if you are on the call and you have a question, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A section. We'd be happy to answer it. While we wait for any questions to come in, I'll turn it back over to you, Connor, and ask if you have any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with.
Great. Thanks, Gabby. And yeah, just some final thoughts. I do think this was a very beneficial workshop that we did with our subject matter experts. And again, it's really a focused approach on improving health and safety in the logging sector. Myself and Adrian, we have worked hard to organize some of these events as well as workshops. And these results, I do think, are going to extremely benefit the logging industry moving forward. So we will do our best to get on this right away and to communicate some of these hazards, as well as make recommendations and controls to help mitigate some of the concerns that you folks have when it comes to logging in Ontario.
Perfect. Thanks, Connor. And not seeing any questions, I think we will go ahead and wrap up the webinar for today. Oh, one question has come in. They are saying, thank you, Connor. Is the top 10 risks for driving infographic available on the website? And I can go ahead and answer and say, yes, it is. And we'll be sending that out in an email shortly so that you'll have the link available.
Awesome.
And another person is asking how the meeting was held. Was it in person or was it virtual?
Yes, great question. So with some of our subject matter experts being spread out all over the province, we actually did this workshop in a hybrid format. So we had individuals attend in person in North Bay at our head office, as well as individuals who were unable to travel due to weather or other commitments were able to attend virtually by using their computer. And the use of what we have now is the OWL technology, where we're able to both facilitate the session in person as well as online for those that weren't able to attend.
Thank you. Another question here saying, was there any discussion on logging road construction and maintenance standards?
Yes, that's a great question. There was lots of discussion on that, as well as adequate maintenance for forestry road construction. We were really diving into, is there any standards on some of the highway travel, such as grading and sanding and whatnot, as well as the coordination and making sure that both of them are on the same page. We did talk about some of the standards, but we didn't dive into what those standards were.
Thank you, Connor. And not seeing any further questions, so I will go ahead. Oh, wait, I think someone, yeah, we got, okay, a couple more come through. Someone else is asking, they said they missed the first few slides and are asking if the results were based on the results of investigations on accidents.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Some of the results were based on investigation, not specific investigations, but people's risk perception. So obviously all our subject matter experts experience different risk perceptions. So we took all of that into account when we looked at their risks, and we had them identify what was keeping them up at night. So that could have been inadequate forestry road maintenance. And then we had them bring that to the table and we voted on it as a workshop. Only our subject matter experts voted, of course, on what was the number one risk. I hope that answers the question.
Great. This isn't a question, but another person is just commenting that our biggest risk in the sector is driving, and that this analysis will be a great tool to find deficiencies.
Awesome. And I agree. Driving is our number one hazard. And myself, as one of the health and safety specialists, I'm primarily on the road, and we are seeing a lot of these trends and things that are happening out there. And I do truly believe that driving is the number one hazard. And it does also show, based on our subject matter experts voting on this. Obviously, our opinion was not included. So we are on par with this being the number one risk.
Absolutely. Another question here, have you used these results to facilitate any significant changes in your WSN certification modules?
Great question. So this got brought up to something that we could focus on right away. Now, I can't speak that it's going to happen, but we were thinking maybe working with the industry and the ministry, maybe developing a set of modular training standards for driving. Now, I don't know what that would entail and whatnot, but that is what we're hoping to maybe propose, is just to have some type of on-the-job performance-based training, to help to reduce some of the driving risk.
Great. So I think that's all the questions that we have for today. So we'll go ahead and close out the webinar. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, New Health and Safety Research on Ontario Logging Industry. A copy of the presentation and the recording will be emailed to you within the next few days and posted on the resources page of workplacesafetynorth.ca. So thank you again, and have